Looking back, I realize how naive I was. How blind. I truly believe my marriage was solid, unshakable, even. My wife, Lauren, and I had been together for nearly 2 decades, and with our 20th anniversary coming up on December 10th, I was convinced we had built something that could withstand anything. If you had asked me back then, I would have told you that our marriage was just like anyone else's. Sure, we had arguments. What couple didn't? But we always found our way back to each other. I thought that was what mattered, that as long as we stuck together, nothing could break us. I was wrong. Our only real rough patch happened early on. We got married young. Lauren was barely 18, and I had just turned 20. We had grown up just a few houses apart, practically raised together. My older brother, Mark, had married her sister, Rachel, the year before us, so in a way, it just felt natural that we would end up together too. Things got complicated when Mark and Rachel had their first kid almost immediately, while Lauren and I struggled. We wanted children, but nothing happened, no matter how hard we tried. The doctors assured us it was normal, that some couples just took longer. But Lauren's mother was not exactly the patient type. Lauren's family was deeply traditional, and with 3 daughters, Rachel, Sophie, and Megan, her mom had always dreamed of a grandson. That dream only intensified when Mark and Rachel had a baby girl. Suddenly, all eyes were on us. We went through all the medical tests, and while Lauren was completely fine, my results were less than ideal. My sperm count was slightly lower than average. Nothing serious, according to the doctors, but it meant we had to be patient. Your baby will come when the time is right, they told us. Patience was easier said than done. The pressure from Lauren's family, the disappointment in her mother's eyes every time another month passed. It was suffocating. But just when it felt like the strain might break us, Lauren finally got pregnant. Our daughter, Lily, was born, and she was perfect, despite her family's desire for a boy. The moment they held Lily, they adored her. And as if the weight had finally lifted, things started falling into place. Not long after, Lauren was pregnant again. This time we had a son, Noah. Her mother was over the moon. She loved all her grandkids, but there was no denying the extra pride she had in finally having a grandson. I even joked with Mark about beating him to it. He just smirked and said, "Give me time." He did not need much. Soon, he and Rachel had their first boy. The next year, Lauren and I welcomed our youngest, Ryan. After waiting for so long, it felt like we were being rewarded all at once. 3 kids in a few years. It was overwhelming, but amazing. Our extended family remained close, even as Lauren's sisters got married and had families of their own. There was always someone around to help, which made parenting a little easier. I thought we had it all: a loving marriage, great kids, and a big support system. Of course, life was not without its challenges. Mark had a serious accident at work once. I stayed by his side through the whole ordeal, even donating blood for one of his surgeries. From then on, we used to joke that we were more than just brothers. We were bonded by blood. By the time our 20th anniversary came around, we decided to do something special. Inspired by Mark and Rachel's big celebration the year before, we booked a private event at a beautiful hotel, inviting family and close friends. At that point, Lily was 17, beautiful like her mother, with long brown hair and sharp green eyes. She had a good head on her shoulders, and while plenty of boys were interested in her, she was smart about who she let close. Noah, almost 16, was the athlete of the family. He played rugby at school, loved working out, and had that natural confidence that came with being good at sports. Ryan, the youngest, was different from his siblings. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He preferred books to sports, and while I try not to compare them, it was hard not to notice how much he stood out in a family full of athletes. That day, I had a small argument with Ryan over something ridiculous. He had left a mess at the dining table. I told him to clean it up before heading out, but instead of the usual sigh and reluctant compliance, he snapped. "You always do this," he shouted, his face red with frustration. "Do what?" I asked, genuinely taken aback. He clenched his fists. "You treat me differently. You're always on my case about something." Maybe that is because he stopped suddenly, his jaw tightening. "Because what?" I pressed. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Nothing. Forget it." But it was not nothing. I could tell by the way his whole body tensed, by the way he suddenly refused to meet my eyes. "Ryan," I said firmly. "Say it." His eyes burned with something I could not place. Anger, maybe, or hurt. But instead of answering, he just muttered, "Forget I said anything," before storming out the door. I stood there, frozen. The words replayed in my head over and over. Maybe that is because what? Was there something I had missed? Something I was not seeing? That night, I brought up to Lauren. She barely looked up from her book. "Ryan has always been more sensitive than the others," she said with a shrug. "He overthinks everything." Her answer felt too dismissive, too rehearsed. For the first time in years, doubt crept into my mind. Was Ryan really just overthinking things? Was there something more? That was when the idea of a DNA test first entered my mind. Once the thought was there, it did not leave. I sat at my desk that night, researching labs that could run tests discreetly. By morning, I had already chosen one. They suggested testing all 3 kids alongside me, just to be thorough. The hardest part was getting the samples without raising suspicion. But I managed. By the end of the week, the tests were sent off. And then, all I could do was wait. Ryan seemed lighter after our argument, like he had gotten something off his chest. But I was left with a weight I could not shake. Deep down, I already knew. Something was wrong. I just did not know how bad it was going to be. Lauren was still the same woman I had known for years. Caring, attentive, and completely unaware that my mind had become a battlefield. On the surface, nothing had changed. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, made dinner in the evenings, and curled up next to me on the couch like she always had. But for me, everything was different. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, the doubt gnawed at me. Every time I looked at her, I found myself wondering, had someone else shared what I believed was ours alone? Had our entire life together been a lie? One evening, we had dinner with Mark and Rachel. It was a typical night. Good food, casual conversation, laughter. But I was not really present. My mind was stuck in a loop, trying to make sense of the thoughts that had taken root ever since Ryan's outburst. I nearly asked Mark right then and there. The words sat on the tip of my tongue, but something held me back. I knew it was irrational. Mark and I looked alike, sure, but we had always been close. The thought that he could be involved in any of this felt impossible. And yet I could not shake it. I convinced myself to wait. If the DNA results confirmed my fears, then I would talk to him. Until then, I was not going to place that kind of weight on my brother's shoulders. Lauren must have sensed something was off. She asked me twice that week if I was okay. "I am fine," I told her. "Just got a lot on my plate at work." She gave me a concerned look, but did not push. That was the thing about Lauren. She always knew when to let things go. Or maybe, deep down, she already knew what was coming. Then, the results arrived. I had arranged for them to be sent to my office instead of our house. The last thing I wanted was for Lauren to see them before I did. I held the envelope in my hands for what felt like an eternity before I finally worked up the courage to tear it open. My eyes skimmed over the report, trying to process the jumble of medical terms and statistics. At first glance, the results seemed reassuring. Ryan was my son. Relief washed over me so fast I nearly laughed. The doubts, the paranoia, it had all been for nothing. I had been torturing myself over nothing. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand down my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. That night, I decided I would take Lauren out somewhere nice, do something special for her, make up for the stress I had been carrying around. Then, just as I was about to toss the envelope into my desk drawer, I noticed something. A note at the bottom of the letter. "For a full breakdown of your results, please call our office to discuss in detail." I frowned. It sounded like a formality, maybe a way to upsell additional testing. But something about it nagged at me. So, I dialed the number. After verifying my information, they transferred me to a geneticist, Dr. Hoskins. "Mr. Walker," he greeted me, his voice calm and professional. "I see you have received your results. Have you had a chance to review them?" "Yeah," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Looks like my fears were all in my head. "Ryan is mine." "You are correct," he confirmed. But then his voice shifted. "However, there is something I need to discuss with you." A cold unease settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "It is not about your youngest son," Dr. Hoskins said carefully. "It is about the other 2 samples, the ones from Noah and Lily. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. What about them? My voice came out hoarse. Dr. Hoskins paused, then spoke in a slow, measured tone. Based on our analysis, they're only half-siblings to Ryan. The words barely registered at first. Half-siblings? That did not make sense. I swallowed hard. What are you saying? Dr. Hoskins sighed. Our findings indicate that Noah and Lily do not share the same biological father as Ryan. The blood drained from my face. That is not possible, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The genetic markers show significant differences between you and both Noah and Lily, he continued. While mistakes in testing are rare, we can conduct additional verification if you would like. Half-siblings. I was not their father. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. The room spun. My head felt heavy, like it was sinking into my shoulders. And then, blackness. I came to with voices murmuring around me. I was slumped in my office chair, a few co-workers hovering nearby. Hey man, you okay? One of them asked. I forced a nod. Yeah, just lightheaded. Someone handed me a bottle of water. I took it, gripping the cool plastic like a lifeline. I cannot do this here. Not now. One of my co-workers insisted on driving me home. I let them. The house was empty when I walked in. Lauren was at work, and the kids were still at school. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, gripping the edge of the counter, tried to steady myself. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed the lab again. Dr. Hoskins answered immediately. I apologized for how that conversation ended. I muttered. I need to go over the results again. Of course, he said gently, as if he knew I was barely keeping myself together. He confirmed it again. Ryan was undoubtedly my biological son, but Lily and Noah were not. I was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Could there be a mistake? If it were just one of them, I might say there was a small chance of error, he admitted. But with both? No, Mr. Walker. The likelihood of these results being incorrect is nearly non-existent. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching my life unravel in real time. There has to be some kind of explanation, I mumbled. Unless. Then it hit me. Unless I had a twin. Or, the thought slammed into me like a freight train. Or a brother, I whispered. Silence. Then Dr. Hoskins spoke, his voice steady. Yes, if you have a brother, that would explain these results. A brother. My mind immediately went to Mark. No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? I let out a shaky breath. Thank you, Doctor, I said numbly, ending the call. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind playing through every moment, every family gathering, every shared look between Lauren and Mark that I had never thought twice about. And then a single, horrifying realization settled in. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. The silence on the other end of the line was thick, stretching long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Dr. Hoskins finally spoke, his voice careful, as if he were handling something fragile. If you would like, we can arrange further testing, including a sample from your brother, to confirm these results. But I was no longer listening. My world had already shattered. What was I supposed to do now? Divorce Lauren? Confront Mark? Pretend none of this had happened? And what about the kids? A piece of paper did not change the fact that I had raised Noah and Lily as my own. It did not erase the bedtime stories, the birthdays, the first steps, and scraped knees. But Lauren, she had lied to me. For years. And Mark? I felt like my chest was caving in. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating. The last thing I remembered was the sound of Dr. Hoskins saying my name, his voice fading like a distant echo. And then, nothing. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. The lights overhead were too bright, the beeping of monitors too loud. My body felt weak, my arms sore. Lauren was sitting beside me. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Jason, are you okay? She asked softly, her voice laced with worry. I turned my head slowly, barely able to meet her gaze. How was I supposed to tell her that everything we had built, 20 years of marriage, a lifetime together, had just crumbled into dust? I had spent days obsessing over Ryan, believing he might not be mine. And in the end, he was my son. But Noah and Lily were not. The irony was unbearable. And the worst part? They knew. They had known for years. Lauren had told them. They had carried the weight of that secret, feeling trapped between loyalty and the truth. They had grown up in a house of lies, forced to pretend. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. But Mark? Mark had nothing to do with it. The father of my children, the man my wife had been with behind my back, was someone else entirely. It was Nick, Rachel's husband, the youngest and most charming of Lauren's sister's husbands. The one who had always carried himself with a kind of effortless confidence, who had always known how to make people laugh. The man who had been part of my family for 2 decades. As I pieced together the wreckage of my so-called perfect marriage, I realized I had only one choice. A few days later, after I was discharged from the hospital, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. I sat all 3 of my children down for lunch and told them everything. Every ugly, devastating truth. I did not sugarcoat it. I did not soften the blow. Lily cried. She wiped at her face, her body trembling as the truth settled in. Noah buried his face in his hands, silent. Ryan clenched his jaw, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. They were all furious, not just at their mother, but at Nick. They wanted to confront Lauren immediately. They wanted to expose Nick to destroy him. But I made them promise to wait. We had to be careful. Despite their pain, despite the shock, all 3 of them swore their loyalty to me. They vowed they would never forgive Lauren. But I had to remind them, no matter what she had done, she was still their mother. She had raised them. She had cared for them. Even as I said it, the words tasted bitter. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, and I realized no act of revenge would ever feel like enough. But a confrontation? That I could do. And I knew exactly when. December 10th, our 20th wedding anniversary. That night, nearly 40 people gathered to celebrate. Lauren's family filled the private dining room of the upscale restaurant. There was laughter, wine, expensive food. But I could not taste a damn thing. I knew what was coming. Lauren? She had no idea. When the time came for speeches, I stood up. Sweat trickled down my back, but I took a deep breath and forced a smile. Welcome, everyone, I said, my voice even. A few light chuckles rippled through the room. I started off slow, small talk, warm words about family, how much this night meant to me. Lauren smiled at me, her eyes soft. She really thought I was about to give a heartfelt speech. And then I saw it, Lily standing up. She walked toward the exit. Then Noah. Then Ryan. Not a word. No explanation. Just 3 children walking away from the mother who had betrayed them. Confusion spread across the room. Lauren's smile wavered. Where are they going? She whispered. She turned to me, panic flickering in her eyes. Jason, she said, her voice tight. Tell them to come back. They're being rude. I kept my voice steady. It is all right. They already know what I am about to say. And since it concerns them, it is better that they are not here. Lauren froze. Her hands trembled in her lap. As I was saying, I continued, looking around the table. 20 years. That is how long Lauren and I have been married. And I thought we had a good life. A happy marriage. A strong foundation. A few guests nodded. But imagine my surprise, I continued, my voice calm, when I found out that Lily and Noah are not biologically mine. The room fell into complete silence. Lauren let out a strangled sound, like the air had been ripped from her lungs. Rachel's husband, Nick, shifted in his seat. I saw it. The way his face paled. The way his fingers clenched into fists. The way his wife looked at him with dawning horror. Lauren was sobbing now, covering her face. I leaned forward. Would you like to tell everyone who their real father is, Lauren? She shook her head violently, her shoulders shaking. No, I pressed. Then maybe someone else would like to step forward. I looked directly at Nick. He would not meet my eyes. The anniversary party ended in chaos. Nick's wife, Rachel, slapped him across the face and stormed out. Lauren collapsed into tears, begging me to just talk about this in private. Guests whispered, shocked, as they scrambled to make sense of what they had just heard. And me? I simply walked away. Because this was not just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with shock and the weight of too many secrets crashing down at once. My gaze swept across the faces around me, daring someone, anyone, to speak. Then I turned to Mark, my brother. He sat there, stiff as a corpse, his fingers gripping the edge of the table like he was bracing for an earthquake. You really going to make me say it? I demanded, my voice cutting through the silence. To my surprise, it was Rachel, Mark's wife, who stood up first. It is not what you think, Jason, she said, her voice trembling. It was not some tawdry affair. It was just to help Lauren have a baby. My knees nearly buckled. She knew. She had known all along. And it was not just an affair. It was planned, calculated, a decision they had made together. My own brother, the father of my children. The room seemed to split, friends muttering awkward excuses as they grabbed their coats, while family members sat frozen in their seats, avoiding my gaze. I clenched my fists, my voice raw. So all of you knew? I spat. Every single one of you. A few nodded hesitantly. Others looked away, guilty. And whose idea was it? I demanded, rage curling around every syllable. Every head turned toward Judith. My mother-in-law. Of course. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Well, thanks, Mom, I said, my voice dripping with venom. Your obsession with having a grandson just destroyed your daughter's marriage. Lauren suddenly found her voice. Jason, please, she sobbed. It was only one mistake. Just one. Please do not do this. I stared at her. One. I echoed, my voice shaking. Just one. She nodded frantically. Yes, yes. It was only that one time. I swear. So what about Noah? I interrupted, my eyes boring into her. Because according to the DNA test, he is not mine either. Her breath hitched. Rachel gasped. What are you saying? She whispered, her voice laced with horror. I turned to Mark. If you're Lily's father, then you are also Noah's. A new kind of silence settled over the room, one that felt like the world had just stopped turning. No one spoke. No one moved. And then Rachel snapped. Her face twisted in rage as she turned to Mark, her hands shaking. You lying piece of trash, she spat. You swore it was just that one time. Mark did not even try to defend himself. He just sat there, his face pale, staring at the table like a coward. And then Rachel turned to Lauren. I agreed to let you use my husband for 1 week, she hissed. And you just kept sleeping with him. Before anyone could react, her hand shot out, striking Lauren across the face. A sickening slap echoed through the room. Lauren stumbled, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. You selfish, disgusting liar. Rachel screamed. Another slap. Then another. It took Judith's other daughters to pull her away, but the damage was done. Lauren was exposed, humiliated. And in that moment, as I watched the chaos unfold, I realized this was not just the end of my marriage. This was the end of everything. I turned to my mother-in-law, Judith. Happy now? I sneered. She sat motionless. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her eyes glazed over with shock. But I was not done. I turned toward Nick, the youngest of the brothers-in-law, the charmer, the one who always seemed just a little too comfortable around Lauren. You have been awfully quiet, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Care to explain why? His wife, Julia, stiffened beside him. She turned to him, her eyes sharp. Oh my God, she whispered. Tell me it is not true. Nick froze. He looked like a man caught in headlights, trapped with nowhere to run. And then Julia exploded. You bastard, she screamed, lunging at him. Nick barely managed to dodge her first swing. Julia, I did not. Shut up, she shrieked. How could you? With her. Lauren flinched. Julia turned to her next. And you? What? You just decided to work your way through the entire family. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, she definitely slept with Nick? I said, watching Nick squirm his seat. It was not like that. Nick stammered. Julia punched him. A solid, satisfying crack rang through the air. Nick yelped, clutching his face, blood trickling from his nose. Julia wiped her hands and turned to Lauren. You are no sister of mine, she spat. And just like that, she stormed out. Rachel followed. And then Pam, the other sister, stood up. She turned to Mark. You are pathetic, she said. I am divorcing you. Do not bother coming home. Mark did not even try to argue. He just sat there, defeated, staring at his hands. Pam, Julia, and Rachel linked arms and left. As they passed Lauren, They threw her one last glare. "We never want to see you again." And then they were gone. I turned back to Judith. "Well," I asked, "is this what you wanted?" She did not answer. She just sat there, staring ahead like a woman who had lost everything. At last, it was Lauren's father, Edward, who spoke. "I am sorry, Jason," he said quietly, shaking his head. If I had any idea." He trailed off, lost for words. At least he had the decency to try. Mark, however, had the nerve to approach me. His face was twisted with shame. "Jason," he stammered. "What can I say?" I looked at him, every ounce of brotherly love I had once felt for him now replaced with nothing but disgust. "Nothing," I said coldly. Then I turned my back on him and walked away. I did not think. I did not hesitate. Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist connected with Mark's jaw. The impact sent a sharp crack through the room. It was not a knockout punch, not even close, but it was enough to send him stumbling backward. His foot caught the leg of a chair, and in an almost laughable display of poetic justice, he crashed onto his back, sprawled out on the floor. He did not bother getting up. For a long moment, nobody moved. The energy that had filled the room just moments ago, rage, chaos, betrayal, was gone. What remained was a thick, oppressive silence. The party was over. That night, Lauren never came home. She came by once, a few days later, to collect some of her things. She stood at the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed, looking like she wanted to say something. Maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. I did not give her the chance. She was a ghost in our home, and she never moved back in. The kids? At first, they refused to speak to her. For weeks, maybe even months, she tried to call, text, reach out. But they ignored her. And while I hated her, I also knew I had to put their well-being first. I did not want them to grow up carrying my hatred. So eventually, they let her back into their lives, but it was never the same. I remained their father. Lauren? She became more like a distant relative. The fallout ripped through the family like wildfire. Of the 3 sisters who stormed out that night, 2 ended up filing for divorce. Rachel left Mark immediately. She wasted no time kicking him out and taking him to court. Nick's wife, Julia, did the same. They both moved on. But Pam stayed. She stayed with Mark, but she made his life a living hell. Her revenge was not quick, not loud, not explosive. It was slow, calculated. She worked her way through his circle of friends, sleeping with nearly all of them, one by one. I heard rumors. I never asked. I did not care. It was not my problem, though I had to admit it was darkly amusing. A few weeks after everything fell apart, something unexpected happened. Lauren's youngest sister, Hannah, called me. She was the most level-headed of the bunch, the one who never got involved in the family drama. She invited me to dinner. I went. At first, it was just that dinner. We talked, we laughed, and then we kissed. One thing led to another. But this time, it was different. It was not just about revenge. It was not about getting even. For the first time in years, I felt something real. Something I had not felt since the early days of my marriage. We took things slow. No rushing. No expectations. And over time, I realized something. I was not with her out of spite. I genuinely cared for her. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. And what about Judith, Lauren's mother? The woman who engineered the disaster that destroyed so many marriages? She got exactly what she deserved. Her husband, Edward, finally had enough. One day, he packed his bags, sold everything, and bought a yacht. Then he sailed away. Literally, he spent the rest of his life traveling through Europe, drinking wine on the Amalfi Coast, eating seafood in the Canary Islands. And the best part? Every now and then, he invited me and the kids to join him. Weeks at sea. No drama. No betrayal. Just freedom. Lily eventually met a Spaniard, a guy from a wealthy family that owned one of the largest marinas in Europe. She married him, and she never looked back. Noah and Ryan? They took their time. They were in no rush to settle down. Too many broken marriages had made them wary. And me? I have not seen Lauren in years. The kids tell me she still asks about me. I do not ask for details. I do not care. I just grumble and move on. And Hannah and I, we are still figuring things out. Maybe one day, I will give marriage another shot. But if I do, it will not be about revenge. It will be about building something real. And this time, I will make sure it lasts.